So for today's notes and main theme for the lesson will be on forensic science. And it definitely is important to focus on this tool and research as forensic science has fundamentally, radically both changed, evolved, and revolutionized the policing and crime scene investigation forever. It is a massive change. So let's get started. So what is forensics? Today, we use the term to mean various types of science that has been applied in matters of involving the justice system and to provide closure to unsolved cases. Forensics is a type of specialized science, in fact, where any science can be a forensic science, it just needs to have some sort of application so it can be used in the form of justice. The type of science that are forensic science can be criminalistics, pathology, anthropology, odontology, engineering, and even etymology. Now, criminologists, this term can be used to describe the comparative forensic science such as fingerprints, documents, firearms, and tools. However, most commonly, criminologist often refers to a myriad of types of physical evidence that has been generated and collected at the scene of the crime. And this can be illicit drugs, blood and/or DNA, fireworks, explosive residues, hairs, fibers, glass, soil, plants, paints, plastics, fingerprints, bullets, and so much more. It is actually quite incredible just how much different kinds of applications and surfaces exist when it comes to determining and reading where the DNA was located. All these examples shown here are a type of forensic science. Now, pathology is a part of forensic science, but a forensic pathologist will determine the cause and the manner of death in cases where someone has died under, well, let's just say unusual circumstances, which basically means not the death is considered to be suspicious, like someone did not die of old age or from a known previously diagnosed terminal illness. And the pathology will look at the cause of death, the event that directly caused the death, which could be things like stroke, drug overdose, auto crashes, poisoning, etc. But a pathologist will also look at the manner of death, what type of death occurred. And for the type of deaths of the individual, there are only four types, which is either homicide, natural, accidental, or suicide. To determine the manner of death, you need to do an autopsy or a post-mortem examination. And this is used to determine the type of death, homicide, natural, accidental, or suicide. And pathologists will work for medical examiners or the coroner's office. In British Columbia, there is the BC Coroner's Office that does a lot of this work. This is often what the morgue or the people for pathologists, their laboratories would look like. Now, it is also important to clarify some key difference fields, such as anthropology. While anthropology can also be connected to forensic science, as a forensic anthropologist will work on the skeletal remains of a deceased individual that has obviously gone through a prolonged period of decomposition. So the flesh is gone. And forensic anthropologists will determine if the skeletal remains are human, and then they'll determine from what part of the body the bones that were found originate from. If they have the correct bones, they can possibly determine gender, age, racial characteristics, and even a social economic status of that particular individual. If there is any injury to the skeleton, such as a major bone being broken, or scabbing, or even scars from a blunt or a sharp object, forensic anthropologists could help provide evidence of the type of injury or death that had occurred to that individual. It is also possible to build a face onto a skull using clay and pegs of various sizes to recreate what the individual might have looked like. This facial recognition becomes incredibly useful for persons that have been missing for a long period of time. And in fact, this is one way actually that individuals who've been missing and their cases have gone cold have been solved. Another realm for forensic science is an odontologist, which basically is a fancy name for a dentistry. Bite marks on a victim or other objects can be matched to a suspect. A forensic odontologist can also help to identify the remains from disasters such as plane crashes, wherein during the post-mortem, dental records are taken from the human remains individual and then matched to files of x-rays that were taken before the accident. It's actually one of the important reasons why it is important to stay on top of your dentist appointment and to say yes when they ask to do the x-rays, because it can be a form of identification for you. A forensic odontologist is also possible to distinguish such causes of facial injury, such as they can tell the difference of someone who accidentally fell down the stairs, whereas someone who was struck in the face by a sharp or blunt object. They study the teeth and the bite marks with the bite mark impressions that are left behind. Forensic engineers can be valuable in cases where something has gone wrong with either a mechanical or a structural entirety, such as a car crash. A failure analysis is one of the major contributions for forensic science for engineers will make it possible for the justice system, where the majority of work for forensic engineers is the investigation of traffic crashes. Accident reconstruction is used to determine speeds, direction of impact, and who was driving the vehicle at the time of the impact. This is another type of forensic science. Entomology is basically forensic to study flies, usually blowflies. And these blowflies are usually first to arrive at the crime scene. Flies and other insects lay their eggs in decaying flesh. Though some insects will do this at different times, other insects such as beetles and wasps will attack and feed off the insects and the eggs. But this is a parade of visitors that takes place surprisingly consistent for all their kind of time travels. A forensic entomologist can determine the post-mortem interval essentially by studying the bugs, eggs, larvae on the deceased person, their flesh. They can determine, as a general estimate, how long ago the death had occurred, and if the person had been poisoned, OD'd, and the person had been poisoned or OD'd, the flies or the insects would also have this substance in their system. You may want to pause the recording and explore this, as this cartoon shows the various stages in collecting insects for forensic investigations. It's actually quite fascinating, a little gruesome, of what can occur and what is used. So, now that we've covered all of that, who are forensic scientists? Essentially, there are two types. The enlisted, which tends to be police officers, and then there are civilians. For forensic scientists to become more technical, civilians were hired because it became difficult to recruit scientists to be police officers. Forensic scientists have made very little function in evidence collected and are usually never at a crime scene, because forensic science main two duties are to analyze the evidence and to provide testimony in the court of law over the evidence that was collected, i.e. giving their expert opinion. When the forensic science is testifying in court, they lay witness testify as to what they have perceived with their five senses, sight, smell, hearing, etc. But they are, a forensic scientist is not to give their opinions. They just provide the science of the scene. Expert witnesses who have knowledge or skills from education and experience that qualify them to give opinions and draw their conclusions are brought in instead. And the judge will then decide if the expert testimony is indeed the one who is qualified to offer it or not. Now, in mainly America, there are lots of private labs that usually do the work for the defendants. This is for America. Canada is mainly just done by the public realm. But there are only prosecutors that has access to a local state laboratory, and private labs will perform service to the criminal justice system by providing resources for those who have been accused of crimes. For the organization of forensic labs, there tends to be three areas: an intake section, analysis section, and then kind of everything else. Kind of new stuff with their experiment. Actually, if you watch shows such as Forensic Files, it's fascinating, all the new types of science and chemicals, and I don't know. I watch that show quite a bit, and every time we get to the forensic part, I just laugh because, oh, insert blah, blah, blah for this type of blah, blah, blah of a forensic science. It's actually it's humorous, but it's also quite, well, impressive of the changes and the capabilities that now exist. During the intake section, the intake officer logs evidence into a LIMS system, which is basically laboratory information system with a barcode, and they will establish a chain of custody for the physical evidence so it can be authentic and proof that's not been altered for it. There must be proof that the evidence seized at the crime scene is the same evidence that has appeared in court. Also, proper chain of custody of the grounds can render it to be admissible in court. If there is suspect or concerns about the chain of custody, this will make the evidence not applicable usually in court. Where also concessions are made before testing so that the test does not ruin the conditions for another. A gun may need to be test fired, fingerprinted, blood removed. The order of sequence is important because when DNA testing is done, a small sample of that collected DNA or forensic science, a small sample of that that's gathered from the crime scene is actually destroyed in the forensic DNA, which is pulling the DNA out. Even when firing a gun, guns have a particular residue. Each bullet has like a registering number. The type of bullet will leave like groove and grain lines inside like the barrel of the gun, along with the actual bullet, where the direction of the bullet was found or entered and left the body. The analysis area is the very familiar laboratory setting. Each scientist will have a designated area for the lab for the handling of the evidence. There's also lots of instruments, glassware, implements, scientists wearing white coats, fancy machines. It's a laboratory like this. The other sections may have a garage where cars are kept for inspection, searching. Firearms have used stainless steel tanks are full of water to use to test firing. Some large labs will have collections of seized weapons as well as munitions, interrogation rooms, and polygraphs. So polygraphs are usually not applicable in Canadian court. It's kind of the other section. To actually gain a career in this field, it requires training, education in either crime lab forensics, forensic pathology, forensic anthropology, forensic odontology, or actual forensic engineer. For crime lab scientists, entry-level requirements include a bachelor's degree in chemistry, biology, forensic science of 1 or 2 years, but this market tends to be incredibly competitive. So recent years and trends have shown that those who are interested in this field will go on and get a master's degree in this to give them a slightly bigger competitive advantage. For a forensic pathologist, you need to graduate from college with an excellent record, to graduate from medical school, complete a residency in pathology, and complete a residency in pathology forensics. So you got like over a decade of education so before you can become a certified forensic pathologist. For an anthropologist, There are actually very few crime labs that can afford to hire a full-time forensic anthropologist. A lab may hire someone with a specialty such as trace evidence, DNA typing, etc. But most actually have PhD in anthropology and/or forensics, and will actually be usually teaching in university to handle, um, well, to pay the bills basically, and then they'll handle each particular case that would require a forensic anthropologist by a case-by-case. Um, the forensic odontologist is similar to a forensic pathologist, except you need to complete a degree in dental school rather than medical. There are very few residents in forensic odontology. It is a rare specialty to have, so you need to be able to work with police as an on-needed kind of basis. And the forensic engineer requires education in engineering. The higher the better, so no undergrads, is either graduate or doctorate. And most forensic engineers have their own companies that are hired by prosecutors or defendants. And that is a little look into forensic science.